profound, something life-altering, because here you are, you got this group of kids, seniors, you got their parents there. It's really the last time. It's the last time you'll have all of them gathered together. And I mean, I would just really like to say something that resonated with them, but I mean, I've done it a couple of times. I can't even remember what I've said, so I'm certain no one else can remember what I've talked about. But I do remember this: my youngest daughter, when she graduated from high school, I guess because she was a senior, the class asked me to speak at their graduation ceremony. And I always thought, this is what I ought to do. And I was kidding my daughter about this because she was asking me prior to, the graduation, saying, "Hey, Dad, what are you going to talk about?" And I think she was afraid that I might embarrass her, and those type of things. And so I said, this is what I was going to do. I was going to get up and I was going to stand there and I was going to say, "I know it's only rock and roll, but I like it." And then walk off. And I really think that if I would have had enough courage to do that, John, that number one, I think they would have remembered that. 30 years from now, when they get together, they said, "Hey, you remember the guy?" They won't remember who I was. They just, "Remember our graduation speaker? Remember what he said? He quoted a Rolling Stone song. Wonder what he meant by that." I think they would have remembered it. And number two, I think it would have solved the problem of ever being asked again to do a graduation speech. So, but I didn't do that. But it's funny because because she made the mistake this morning. I had to drive her to the airport, and she made the mistake of saying, "Dad, I know you're preaching this morning. What are you going to talk about?" And I brought that up, and we were laughing about it because she thought that was really funny, and I thought it was pretty funny too. But what does strike me about what I'm about to read, that text for you, is I really do think it's a profound text, and I really do think it's life-altering. And while it's familiar to you already, and while I won't have the capability of delving into it any deeper than you probably have already been into it, just know that my purpose here is to remind you of something that Jesus said, this is really important. And so I thought we might talk about it for a minute. But before I read it to you, and again, it'll be familiar to you when I read it to you. Before I read it to you, let me set the context of it a little bit. Jesus has been teaching, and he's teaching a variety of groups. Prior to this, he had given a parable about tenants, where he had said there was a landowner who had a vineyard, and he didn't give it away, but he let some people work this vineyard of his. And when it was time for the harvest, he sent a servant to these people who were working his vineyard to collect what was due him. And instead of paying what they should have, because it was his vineyard, they killed the servants that he sent. And he did this over and over, until finally the landowner decided, well, I'll send my son. Surely they'll pay him the honor that he's deserved. But when he sent his son, they did the same to him. And then Jesus asked the audience that he was teaching, what do you think the landowner will do to these tenants? And the answer, of course, was destroy them, basically, paraphrasing a little bit, but destroy them. And this made the Pharisees mad. They were in the audience. It made them upset. They were in the audience listening because Scripture tells us that they knew that Jesus was talking about them, that they were the tenants and God was the landowner, and he had sent his son, and they weren't acting faithfully. And so from that point on, Scripture tells us that they were trying to arrest Jesus. They were trying to destroy him, take him down. Well, there's a little bit of time that passes. He continues to teach, teaches a couple other lessons, talks about the Sadducees, which is another religious group. They question him. They question him from some stuff. They're trying to trick him. They're talking about the resurrection and go into a conversation about a guy die, or a man and woman are married and the guy dies, and goes on, and Jesus answers them successfully. And so the Pharisees decide, well, okay, now it's our turn. He's answered the Sadducees successfully. So now we're going to try and trick Jesus with some questions. We're going to try and test him with some questions, see if we can trip him up with his own words, which is, that's, I don't know. People still do that. We still do that today, don't we? We try to turn people's own words against them. I like to deal with people. I'm an athletic director right now, and I like to deal with my coaches. And when I hire a new coach, one of the things I generally tell them as we're going through the interview is, listen, if you and I are going to work effectively together, we've got to get to the point where we don't have to measure words with each other, where I can tell you what I think and you can trust what I'm telling you is how I feel and what I think, and you do the same to me. And if I hurt your feelings, you have the right to say to me, you've hurt my feelings, and I'll try to do better. And if you can say anything you want to me, and I'll try to do the same to you. If you hurt my feelings, I'll try to say, look, you hurt my feelings with this, but let's move on. Let's get past the hurt feelings. And so we can just be honest with each other. But you all know that's a hard thing to do. I mean, it's a hard thing to do with anybody. It's a hard thing to do with people that you love, isn't it? I mean, is there a husband sitting here whose wife hasn't said, honey, does this make me look fat? I want you to raise your hand if you said, yeah, that makes you look as big as a barn. I mean, even with people you love, sometimes you have to measure what you say, don't you? You can't speak your whole mind, because you get yourself in some situations where you don't want to be in. I mean, have your kids ever asked you this? Which of us is your favorite? Someday I'm going to say, when they ask me, what makes you think I like any of you? No, I'm not going to say that. But that's what the Pharisees are trying to do to Jesus at this point. They're trying to trip him up. Okay, they're trying to use his own words against him. So, with that as our context, let me read the text itself, and then let's talk about it for just a minute. Starting in verse 34 of chapter 22. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question: Teacher, which is the greatest commandment of the law? Now, if you're a lifelong churchgoer like I am, and I know a lot of you are, you know how he answers this. And I'm going to read it for you in just a second. But one of the things that struck me the last time I read this, actually, and hadn't struck me before this, was the idea that this concept that Jesus could have said anything right here. Now, I know what he did say, because God, in his wisdom, chose to preserve it. But understand, at this moment, when the question gets asked, and this is what I think is really important for us, if you're really going to get what I'm trying to say this morning, it'd be important to understand this, that Jesus could have said anything. He could have said, when they said, what's the greatest commandment? He could have said, well, they're all pretty important. You probably should pay attention to all of them, because they're pretty important. That would have been a pretty good answer, wouldn't it? Because they're all pretty important. Maybe we ought to pay attention to all of them, because I think that would have been a correct answer to some degree. But it wasn't the answer that he gave. He could have said, well, you guys have messed up worship. So let me tell you how you handle worship, because you guys have really mucked this one up. So let me tell you how you do that. He could have said, well, hey, listen, this is what you really ought to pay attention to. I know you guys are having these fights about whether you use instruments, whether you don't use instruments. Let me settle that one for you right now, because this is really important, and you guys are fighting about it, and I want to solve that problem for you. I want to settle the issue of that one. Or I want to tell you, I want you to have a full understanding of what baptism really signifies. Because those are all things we've talked about and we've gone back and forth on. He could have said any of those things and said, these things are really important, and they must be because you guys spend a lot of time talking about them. So they really must be important, so let me help you out with this. So he could have said anything. But this is what he said. Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and prophets hang on these two commandments. Love God, love others. Okay, now, just so, because I think this has gone over my head a lot, okay? So I'm not saying, when I say this, you'll probably think, well, duh, you're so dumb. I recognized this years and years ago. But has it ever occurred to you that everything, I'm going to take a long way around to tell you what I want to tell you right here, okay? Not everything that says they're the greatest is the greatest. You understand that, don't you? You guys ever see the movie Elf? You know, it's getting to be Christmas time. I like that movie. That's a good movie. We'll probably watch it 5 times before Christmas gets here this year. And one of my favorite scenes in the movie Elf is when, who's the guy who plays Elf? I can't remember his name. Will Ferrell. When Will Ferrell, he's a human who's been raised by, in case you've been living under a rock and you've not seen it, okay? He's an elf, he's a human who's been raised by elves in the North Pole. He's really, really naive. He doesn't know about human life at all. And finally, through a series of misadventures, he finds out he's a human and he thinks, hey, I've got to go trace my beginnings. I've got to find out what it's really like. I'm living among these elves, but I'm really a human. I got to go and find out who my dad is and do all these things. So his dad apparently is living in New York City, so he's going to New York City. So you can imagine, he's been raised at the North Pole. He's a little bit naive, doesn't really understand how the city works. Santa has to caution him before he leaves, saying, listen, if you see gum on the sidewalk, don't pick it up. That's not there for you to chew, stuff like that. So he heads to New York City, and he gets to New York City, and he's walking, and he finally gets to the city, and he sees this sign in this little flea-bitten cafe that says, world's greatest cup of coffee. So he busts in. Congratulations! You did it! You've made the world's greatest cup of coffee. Well, what makes that funny is the fact that, hey, it's probably not the world's greatest cup of coffee. And that's the comic relief there, is that just because you say something's great doesn't really mean that it's great. I would really be cautious if somebody says, I'm the greatest. I'd be cautious of that person. Maybe they are, but that would be a huge red flag to me if somebody said that about anything they said, I'm the best, I'm the greatest, I'm the most important. That would set me back a little bit, and I'd think, I got to think about this one a little bit. But I don't have to think about this. When God, in the form of man, says, this is the greatest. This is the most important. That's not the world's greatest cup of coffee. That's saying, okay, you've asked me, so I'm going to tell you. You really want to know? Here's what's really important. You want something profound? You want something life-altering? Hey, it's great if you know about all these other things, but I'm going to tell you what you have to know about. I'm going to tell you what's the greatest, what's the most important, and what it is love God and love others. And I have to tell you, again, this might not apply to you, so if I'm too personal here, you'll have to forgive me. The first part seems easier to me. Loving God. He's God. He deserves it. You know, if you sit down and you study this reasonably, logically, if you have any faith that he is who he says he is, then how could you not love him? I mean, he's God. He's the creator of the universe. Everything you see, he made. He's all powerful. He's all knowing. He's everywhere. I mean, don't you like the changing of the leaves right now? It finally hit me. Hey, the leaves have changed. I was in Louisiana last weekend. Leaves haven't changed down there. And I could tell as I was driving back from the deep south to Tennessee that, hey, the leaves are starting to change. I like seeing it. And God does that. That's God. I can't do that. I can't make a leaf change color. I can stare at it. I can change colors. I can do whatever I want to. It's not going to change colors, but God can do that. I can't do that. He's God. And on top of that, he's my Father. He's not just God. He's my Father. He chooses to let me be his child. So he's my Father, and he's a perfect Father. I've been blessed. I have a wonderful earthly Father. I told you I was in Louisiana. I go down there every year that I can for the start of deer season. I'm not a deer hunter. I sit up in the stand. I fall asleep. They hate bringing me when I deer hunt because they really want some meat, and I just like seeing them. I take pictures of them, I sit there with a rifle, and I'm taking pictures of deer, and so they fuss at me because I don't shoot them, that kind of stuff. But I like going down there because I get to spend time with my dad and my brother. My dad, who's 85 years old, he's been a wonderful father. I've never lived a day in my life where he hasn't loved me. And trying to leave from him is just so sweet because he's trying to give me everything. You guys need some canned tomatoes? You need some canned green beans? How are you? Are you set on those? He's given me apples to bring home because we don't have apples in Tennessee. So I got to get some apples from Louisiana and bring home with me. You guys need some water? Let me cook breakfast before you leave. Now, maybe your dad's not like that, but my dad is. He's trying to give me stuff that he needs. You know what I mean? That he shouldn't give me. He's still trying to give it to me. So I have been blessed enough to have an image of an earthly father that when I think of God as a father, that's a sweet thing for me. Because I know how my earthly father is. And I know how he tries to treat me. And I know how I think my earthly father, I think he would die to let me live. That's how I feel about it. Now, I know everybody hasn't been that blessed. But the fact is you still have a sweet father. You still have a sweet father. You have as much as I love my dad and as much as I could describe all the sweet things about him, he's still done things that aren't right. He still hasn't made all the right decisions. We've still gone crossways from time to time. But the fact is my Heavenly Father has never broken a promise to me. He's never done anything that I didn't deserve. In fact, he's treated me much better than I deserve. And so the idea of loving God seems easier to me. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it seems easier to me because he's God and he's my perfect Father. He's the giver of all good gifts. He's just blessed my life. It's that second one that gets me. When Jesus said, you really want to know what's important? You really want to know what the greatest is? Well, you love God. Okay, stop there, please. Stop there. Because he deserves it, and I know he deserves it, and when I don't do it, shame on me. But that second part seems more difficult to me. You got to love others. Well, there's parts of that are kind of even easy for me. It's easy for me to love my wife. It's easy for me to love her. She deserves it. I don't know how she puts up with me. And I mean, it's easy for me to love her because she does deserve it. And I don't have much problem with that. And there's other people that it's easy for me to love them. But there's some that I have no relationship with. Really. It's not that I dislike them. I just have really no relationship with them. And there are others that act like they like me or say they like me, but then they don't really act like it. And then there are others who don't even say they like me. In fact, might go so far as to say, I don't like you. I certainly don't love you. And as far as I can tell when I read this, I think I'm supposed to love all those categories. That first category I don't have much problem with. But you start getting down that second, third, and fourth category, I struggle with those a little bit. I might, okay, let me do this for you, okay? Because this will help, maybe this will help define my term a little bit and help you understand. When I'm talking about loving others, and I think Jesus may have meant more than I'm about to say, but I certainly think he means what I'm about to say here. You can define love in a lot of different ways. People have tried it through the ages. I've heard preachers get up here and talk about agape and phileo and talk about all those different types of love. We talk about romantic love. We talk about brotherly love. We talk about all those things. So, again, I'm not the smartest cookie, so let me tell you how I would define what I'm talking about to you to see if it makes sense to you, okay? This is how I would define it. I care enough about you that I'm going to try and give you what you need. Now, you think about that one for a minute. You might define it different. Now, you understand, I didn't tell you that I care enough about to give you what you want. I don't even do that for people I love. Because sometimes the things they want aren't the things they need. I've looked at my children, and I hope you've done this too at some point, and say, I know you want this, but I love you too much to give you that. I know you want to go down here on spring break, but I know I love you too much to let you go there. So I'm not going to do that. So I understand that just because you want something doesn't mean I should provide it for you. But I do think this, when I recognize that you have a need, I think I'm called to provide for that need if I have the resources and the capability to do that. And that's how I would define loving people, is doing that. And again, for the people I love, I mean, that's not really that much of a chore. In fact, that's kind of an honor. I told you about my dad. If I get a chance to do something nice for my dad, I like doing it. If he needs something, it's an honor for me to be able to provide that for him. You understand that. You have people in your life like that, don't you? Where you crave chances to demonstrate your love for them. And it makes you feel better. It makes you feel more like you want to feel when you do those things. My dad makes deer jerky. I told you they're deer hunters. They really do like deer. And he makes deer jerky. And for some reason, he can't buy big bottles of soy sauce in Monroe, Louisiana. So he calls me to buy because he thinks you can get them up here. He says, go to Sam's. They have big bottles of soy sauce. Go buy me some big bottles of soy sauce. And here's what I'm thinking. Dad, I don't have a Sam's membership card. Do you think I told him that? No. I thought, I'll go buy a Sam's membership card. If they sell soy sauce in big bottles, I'm gonna go buy that. He doesn't need to know I don't have a Sam's card because he's asked me to do something. I love him. He needs it. I want to do that. I'm glad you asked me. Like I told you, there are people I don't have any problem with that second part with. But there's plenty of people that I don't treat the same. I told you I took my daughter to the airport this morning, and on the way back I'm coming down Harding Place, and I see a Hispanic man walking. I'm driving this way. He's walking on the side of the road this way. And so I'm thinking, I wonder if he needs a ride. So I drive up a little further, and I see a car broken down, and I think, I bet that's his car. So I turned around. This is the point where you give me a standing ovation, okay? So I turned around. I knew what I was going to preach on, and I kind of didn't want to feel as big a hypocrite as I normally feel, okay? So I turn around, and I come back, and I pull up next to, I have to pull in the turn lane because he's walking this way, and now I'm going this way. So I pull in the turn lane, I roll down the window, and I say, hey, you need a ride. I don't think he understands a word I'm saying. He answers me back. I don't understand a word he's saying. But he's shaking his head vigorously. So I'm trying to go farther thinking, well, he doesn't understand. I want to help him here. So I'm saying, well, is that your car? You sure you don't need me to take you somewhere? No, again, I don't even know what he said. I mean, he kept just shaking. It was obvious through his body language. He didn't want to get in the truck with me. Looking at me, I probably don't blame him. But he didn't want to get in the truck with me. And it struck me, wow, I hate that. Wish I could have helped him. I don't have any relationship with him. But in this case, I thought I was living up to number 2. But you go down a little bit farther to the people who say, I like you, but then they act different to you. Those people give me problems. I told you I'm an athletic director. I have disgruntled parents who come to me, okay? And they want to talk about their coaches that their children are playing under. And they're generally not coming to compliment the coaches. They're coming to tell me the problems. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with disgruntled parents where they start at something like this. Now listen, I really like this coach. He's a friend of mine. And then they launch into their tirade. And I can't help, it takes me a long time to get past the point. I've never said this to one of them, but I've always wanted to. You and I must define friendship different and liking different. Because my friends don't go to my boss and tell him what a bad job I'm doing. I wouldn't think you were my friend if you did that to me. I wouldn't think you liked me if you went to my boss and did that to me. But they do that. But whether you've experienced a situation where you thought you had a relationship with somebody, a cordial relationship, and they did something that just made you rethink that. And it's hard. It's hard to provide what those people need when they need it. But I think about what God has done for me and how He's loved me. And then that last category, the people who really hate me. Now, the one good thing about that is usually you don't even know who they are because they don't have anything to do with you. But the truth is we live in a world now where they might fly a plane into your building to try and kill you. They don't like you. And they'll come out and say, I don't like you, and I want to do away with you. I want to destroy you. That's a little tougher group to love. But again, I go back to what I said. It appears to me that Christ, when asked, what's the most important thing? Love God and love others. And I'm afraid they fall into that category. You think about it. You think if they fall in those categories. Just because I say it doesn't mean it's right, but think about it. I heard a guy say this, a preacher. He said, if you think you're in the kingdom and you don't love others, you're mistaken. If you think you love, I think Scripture says this, if you think you love God but hate others, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, you're mistaken. You're not a part of kingdom work just because you think you love God. You're part of kingdom work if you love God and you love others. In our Sunday school class, we're reading the New Testament. We're reading through Peter right now, and I liked what Peter said about it. We're reading in the Message, and so sometimes it says things different than what I'm used to, the King James or the New American Standard or the New International. It says things different. That's one of the reasons I like reading. I don't always agree with what I read, but it makes me think about things. But I did like this. Peter said this, and I thought, wow, that's kind of appropriate, seeing how I knew I was going to talk about this. He said, love others like your life depends on it. That's all I have. If there's some way we can help you, come forward as Terry leads the song.
Cleansing power, are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in His grace this hour? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed in the blood, in the soul cleansing blood